A83650 versus BloodTrail.
Welcome back, guys. My name is Soto, and it's my great pleasure to introduce to the broadcast for the first time Mr. Derek Fresh Dude Brown. How you doing, my friend?
I'm doing absolutely great. There was a pretty nail-biting first game to get things underway there, with my personal pick, Viper, coming through, much to my delight. But we've got another good one coming up now.
We do indeed, yeah. Contrary to what Dan set up, we have a slightly different game for you. It's A83650 going up against BloodTrail, and we don't want to keep you guys waiting too much longer, so let's just go ahead and meet those players. Starting off with making his first championship appearance representing the Europe region and Poland, A83650.
And then the newcomer from Taiwan, it's BloodTrail.
BloodTrail is going to be going to the Summer Championships.
I don't know much about BloodTrail. I watched his games when he played in the HCT Asian Pacific playoffs. He played pretty well.
And now BloodTrail has to help.
积分的那个街上有看过他，天梯也没遇过他。
Now A is going for the aggressive Alex Straza play without Bunny Hopper's chance to respond here.
The thing is, he's playing Hunter, which is, in my opinion, not a good deck for Conquest, so that might struggle for him.
然后他也没在开实况，所以我也没看过他。我跟他准备的都还算可以。
I know that I'm an underdog, but some people are already knowing me pretty well, and they know that I'm good at this game. So that's what makes me feel that I should be okay in this tournament. I should be fine, yeah.
Up next, A83650 versus BloodTrail.
A couple of fascinating comments from A8 there, specifically, that I want to pick up on. First on, he said he considered himself the underdog, when actually we have it pegged the other way around. I think BloodTrail is one of the biggest unknown factors that we see coming into this tournament. A8 hasn't hit the championship before, but he is a player that we've seen around on the circuit.
That's exactly right. I think he summed it up pretty well in saying, I don't know much about BloodTrail, but he played surprisingly well. He's just one of those players who hasn't had a lot of success on the international scale at all, but with, I believe, 4 consecutive top 50 ladder finishes, as well as just playing very well at the APAC playoffs as well. He could be one of those kind of players who just swoops out from nowhere and nabs his spot to the World Championships, much like his countryman Samuel Tsao last year.
Yeah, both of these players making their first championship appearance. I believe BloodTrail actually went through his first playoffs to his first championships, and there's been one other player I know that's done pretty well in their first playoffs and their first championships. That's a man by the name of Orange, who got there at the first port of call. But we do have lineups for you, Derek, and we were talking about these lineups a little bit before we came out here. What do you make of the differences in these two lineups?
So relatively similar, I would say, in terms of their chances of taking it. No real underdog in terms of matchups. And to get things started here, 2 of the most common lineups that we have in the tournament. BloodTrail rocking that even Warlock that we saw have reasonable success in the last series, and the Taunt Druid again for A83650. The real outlier, I suppose, the weird decks for both players are the Control Mind Blast piece for A8, which I think really could struggle, and obviously the Hunter for BloodTrail, which A8 thought also could struggle.
Yeah, that's the other comment I wanted to pick up on, because he specifically, he didn't say, you know, I think it's a bad deck. He said, I think it's a poor deck for Conquest. I think quite the opposite. I think it's
agree.
A really good deck to come in to target certain things, like Taunt Druid, you know, whatever else you were looking to beat. But enough about that. We'll get to it when we get there. Thankfully, while we've been wasting time talking about the lineups in general, it's been a pretty slow opening, as you'd expect from even Warlock going up against the Taunt Druid. But what are the big explosive moments you're looking for in this matchup, Darryl?
I mean, for BloodTrail, he's just got it right there already in his hand. The Mountain Giant into the Twilight Drake is really what you're looking for pretty much every single time in this matchup, or double Mountain Giant if you can get your hands on that as well, because while there is the possibility, of course, for Naturalize now to fight back against some of those large minions that Druid has traditionally struggled against, if they're spending their turns giving you more cards, and not even developing stuff of their own like Nourish and Wild Growth, you're usually pretty happy.
Yeah, this is something that was, I think, tested very extensively when it was Q-Block back then, but when Taunt Druid first appeared, it was, you know, do I worry about filling my hand if they're going to naturalize my Giant? Do I go tap Giant and then get it naturalized and burn cards? Do I try and go Twilight Drake route instead? But yeah, in the end, I think people ended up agreeing with you. It's really not a big deal if they burn their naturalized dealing with one of your threats.
I mean, I will give him a quick shout out, is obligatory for every Englishman on cast. Ball Control the other day on stream, I believe, did try just not tapping and going into Mountain Giant on turn 4 to play around the naturalizer.
Okay.
He did win that game, but obviously in general, you're just wanting to, as you say, cycle through your deck as quickly as possible and find those threats on the curve. Because make no mistake, BloodTrail in this matchup has to close it out sooner rather than later. If you give the Druid all the time in the world, eventually they're just going to have an unlimited amount of taunts, it seems, to just close out the game.
See some of A8's record here. As I mentioned leading in, we haven't seen him at a championship event, but we've seen him there and thereabouts with strong results in playoffs, and he's been a fantastic performer, as you saw there in the Polish Championship, as well as on the DreamHack circuit, which I know we're both pretty familiar with, Darren.
Absolutely, and it's good to see some of these players who are more known nationally rather than internationally within their respective countries getting that respect that they deserve, because there are so many players, I think actually in Europe in particular, who are very, very good at the game, but because of the density of good players, haven't had that breakout performance.
Yeah, first world problems. There are too many good players in Europe for all of them to make it to championships. I do like your point about you do have to kind of get a move on as the Warlock in this matchup. It was kind of the same thing when Q-Block was the more prevalent deck, but you could sometimes hang in the late game because your Blood Reaver Gul'dan was so much more explosive than it is in even Warlock, right? So I definitely agree with the idea that you just need to get threats going, but I guess the downside to that as well is that without cubes in your deck, it's actually harder for you to be aggressive.
Well, yeah.
Go ahead.
I totally agree with you actually there. Like you said, the aggressive route kind of dies without the cubes and facelesses there, but also the late game route also suffers a lot, because there were several matches, I believe actually at DreamHack Summer recently, where the Q-Block would just copy a Hadronox with the faceless, and all kind of crazy nonsense would occur with Void Lords and Void Walkers and stuff like that. Obviously, the even Warlock, a much more honest deck, I think, as Kibble was saying in the last series. It just throws down big minions, nothing too fancy, and hopes that it gets the job done.
A8 choosing to ramp this turn and cycle the Wrath. He, as he did that, you saw him just mouse over the far left card of his hand, which is the Hadronox. So making sure right now it seems like he feels he doesn't need a great deal of card draw from the Nourish. Just cycling the Wrath is going to be enough. How do you feel about that with this hand makeup right now?
I mean, very generally in Taunt Druid, you just don't really want to draw with the Nourish. It essentially plays a lot like a big Druid deck, if you remember that from the last year of the Mammoth. Where
remember it? Admirable's playing it right now in the green room.
Fair enough.
He's not. He's playing Meat Wagon in a Fire Priest.
Thanks to this guy, right?
It's a Darek Genius Brown over there, yeah.
But yes, Nourish for ramp is so important because there are literally no 6 or 7 cost cards in the deck. So branching over those mana costs where you do very little is super important. So for A83650 there, especially with double branching paths to draw if he needs to, I think ramp is definitely the way to go, because you just want to be getting to your absurd turns as quickly as you can. I'm of course talking about turns like Master Oakheart in particular, but even just something like Hadronox into Naturalize would be very good just to start locking out the game.
Right. Now with the Naturalized drawn, A8 at least has some kind of game plan developing, but what is that? I was just about to say, is that Naturalized, is he going to be super greedy and try and reserve it for the Hadronox, or does he just have to deal with this Mountain Giant? And you really can't fault it here. It does end up burning a card as an auxiliary effect as well, which is always something that you feel nice about, but most of the time, something like that happens, and it's fairly inconsequential, burning an Acidic Swampoos.
Absolutely, and I think for A83650, this is a pretty good play, actually, because obviously the play I was first talking about was naturalizing your own Hadronox to give you an instant wall of taunts. But generally for the even Warlock, these turns of kind of 7 through 9 are generally a lot weaker than what they're doing on turns 3 and 4 and 5 with the Giants and Twilight Drakes. So if he's not under that much pressure, maybe he can clear up with a few taunts and swipes. He could just play the Hadronox from his hand, and if he doesn't die, then a cube perhaps on the following turn could just lock out the game.
Yeah, I think Hadronox coming down without a naturalize is obviously very, very risky against transform decks, against hexes and polymorphs and things like that. Against decks that are just going to silence it, I'm not too afraid of that happening. It will slow you down a little bit, but then, as you said, you get all of those cube activations later on. You know, even if you have to kill your first silenced 3/7 and then just witching out a cube on a later turn, and yeah, exactly as you suggested, he's just going to jam it on the board, recognizes he's at 32, there's 10 in play, no big deal, and now BloodTrail has a decision on his hand, because do you always just Spellbreaker a Hadronox? Is there merit to waiting?
I mean, I think you have to. You could obviously consider the merit of going for silencing a cube after they cube it.
Right.
But I think that's a little bit too greedy from the Warlock. You need to realize that the Druid does not need to get every activation of Witching Hour to win the game. They only need to get 1 or 2 board full of taunts in order to win the game. So going for the super late game value plan of silencing a cube with Hadronoxes in it instead, I think is thinking a little bit too late game. BloodTrail here, as we are seeing, needs to focus on the immediate, kill his opponent right now, which he's doing a respectable job of.
Yeah, the only counter-argument I could present to that is that this first Hadronox, like this Hadronox that's in play right now, is actually quite low value. There aren't a lot of taunts built up in the pool already. So the net value of your silence, if you're looking at it like that, is not very good. But I think what this potentially allows for BloodTrail is like he's just played a tempo 4-3 here that does something very, very nice in silencing this Hadronox. And in the 2 or 3 turns it's going to take A8 to refill from here, he can just beat him up.
And the other thinking for BloodTrail is if he silences this now, even if there is the kind of auxiliary ways to bring back the Hadronox, as we've been mentioning with things like Cube Witching Hour, that's a couple of turns away from actually getting an activated Death Rattle of Hadronox. So he can use that time to his advantage to pull the board in his favor and just kill his opponent right now. Because with tempo swings like this of the Black Knight on a Sleepy Dragon, this is looking surprisingly scary for A8.
This is what Hearthstone players dream about. This is what they lie awake at night in a cold sweat, just picturing in their mind over and over again. Black Knight on a 9-mana 4/12.
That's some good stuff. And A8 bows his head. He knows that was the last thing he wanted to see there, because now, even with a cube off the top, he cannot go cube on... Oh no, he would have to kill it off the Hadronox here, so cube off the top or naturalize would actually give him the ability to resurrect a board of taunts. But then the thinking is, like you said, there's not actually that much value from it.
Right. Yeah, BloodTrail has played this very much as you suggested he should. He has made more or less the highest tempo turn he could on any given turn. It just fit in very nicely. He was able to do that alongside the Spellbreaker, which slowed down A8 so much. He has drawn essentially every tech card he needed in the matchup to get here, but still executed his game plan very, very nicely, and A8 just has to go digging.
It's not a bad card to find there, but it's just not good enough. He needs way more mana to be able to clear off the board completely. I'm looking at double branching paths just for quadruple armor. Maybe that can keep him alive for a turn.
That really neutralizes 1 turn of the damage that's in play.
But it gives you that one crucial possibility to find either Naturalize, the 1 copy of Naturalize left, I believe, or the cube off the top.
Right. One branching path and swipe, is that ever more beneficial? Probably not, right? He's just going to get out his Hadronox here, which looks a little bit awkward because he still has to challenge. And now, actually, with the Hellfire, that is just exact lethal still on board. A8 could not find a way to play around 3 damage, which is the break point. As you said, he could have gone much, much deeper on the armor to do so, but he tried to set himself up a win condition with that Hadronox, but it still looked a little awkward because it was a couple of turns away from being able to trade through.
I agree, and I think now that I actually look at the breakpoints of numbers, 4 gain 6 armors off of the branching paths was probably a bit too much, but maybe 3 and draw a card would have left him able to find a cube off the top, which probably still wins him the game. And then he doesn't die to anything in the immediate, basically, because there's not that much burst in the deck from Even Warlock. So maybe a little bit too optimistic there, because the chances of Even Warlock having 1 card, which they have 2 of in their deck at that point, is incredibly high.
Well, as we mentioned earlier, these are 2 players who are making their first championship appearance, so you guys might not know too much about them just yet. We can hopefully solve that for you right now.
I wanted to build a strategy that is good against both Even Warlock and Taunt Druid. So that's why I brought Miracle Rogue, Cube Lock, Taunt Druid, and Control Priest. I had the biggest problem with the 4th deck. I was thinking about bringing Mage or maybe Shadow Rock Shaman, but I didn't really feel like those decks were good for my strategy and for my playstyle, so I ended up with Control Priest. I expected some more aggro decks, so that's why I wanted to play the class, the deck. I was wrong. Healing All Day and Terna are playing like whole aggro lineups, and they're the only people in the tournaments playing that strategy. I think I'm pretty unfavored against Nargulden's lineup. He made a really smart choice of not bringing Warlock, and that was a really good idea, I think. I like Cube Lock. I think it was a really good choice for the tournament, just because of the amount of big spell mages and Shadow Rock Shamans. I think it should be pretty good. I don't know why like only 2 or 3 people brought Cube Lock to this tournament, but it's fine. Like, I'm not complaining a lot.
And BloodTrail is going to be going to the Summer Championships.
因为要看他们遇到谁，不过我天选之人是投那个 Tuna， 积分的那个结算有看过他，天梯也没遇过他，然后他也没在开实况，所以我也没看过他。我跟他准备的都还算可以，打那个优异会开比较小，因为他有偶数煞跟奇迹贼、机炮贼，所以他会打我会比较开大，然后打拿古蛋是55开。控制法吧，有奇数胜、奇数贼、偶数煞。
Love hearing more about the players, especially hearing them dig that deep down into their lineup construction. I think that's something that we don't often get to hear players talking about on these broadcasts. I think it definitely, makes clear how much time, effort, preparation goes in before you even play a single card in a Hearthstone tournament.
Absolutely. That was one of the things that led me to choose my pick of Viper, because talking to him a lot in the hotel so far, as BloodTrail gets one of the worst hands I've ever seen. Actually, I suppose Naturalize against Giant isn't so bad, but for Viper, he thinks about the game in a very creative way. I think nothing is taken at face value, which is very important in this meta when, again, there is no class that has 100% representation, so everything is on the table here.
That's a great point. But yeah, I don't know how bad this hand is. If you're BloodTrail, you just draw a taunt minion off the top every single turn from now until turn 9, you're chilling.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, actually, I take that back. It's not fair enough. It's very unlikely to be happening. And A8 does have a nice hand to be moving along with. The main benefit that people are playing the Even Warlock version over the Cube Lock version is just how much more likely you are to get Mountain Giant on curve, and as well as obviously you could get it out a turn earlier here.
Yeah.
But being able to get it on curve feels fantastic for A8, just to hope his opponent doesn't have the naturalize and really start pushing some damage.
A8 has to play a card here with the kind of classic curve of old school handlock and now up until Q block, and might as well be the Doomsayer. It shuts down anything like Oaken Summons, right? Coming out from BloodTrail means he gets uncontested Giant on the board, which will do just nicely. But we heard A8 talk in his little media piece there about the reasonings why he brought Q block over Evenlock. Do you agree with his assessment?
I mean, it makes some amount of sense to me because the main thing he was saying about it's smart that Nalgodan did not bring Warlock, I think he was basically alluding to Evenlock rather than Q-Block, because it's a deck that's very easy to target in combination with Taunt Druid. I find a lot of the decks that are good against one are good against the other, and given that they are the two most represented decks here at HCT Summer, making yourself not so vulnerable to the likes of Miracle Rogue and Control Mage at the same time makes a good amount of sense to me. But it's looking to be in a decent spot here because it has a bit more game against those control decks, which the vast majority of this meta is.
Derek, I'm willing to concede now that this hand might not be the best. He did not, in fact, draw a Taunt Minion every turn. He drew Swipe Spellstone, Swipe Double Wrath, which was, yeah. A big old pile of removal is not really what you want. It can be okay in some situations, but the removal just doesn't line up well against Q-Block, right? It's just not good enough.
Exactly, and I mean, if you get the ramp, you can go for stuff like double swipe on a Giant or something just to get you through to your stronger late games, because I think still with this deck as the Taunt Druid up against the Q-Block rather than the Evenlock, you have to be a little bit greedier because there's obviously a lot more late game, the power for much more disgusting things to happen with the likes of Cube and Faceless. But generally, you don't need all the value from your deck as the Taunt Druid. You just need enough to get a board they can't answer, and then you just push for lethal with branching cards.
A8 just slams that Doomguard from hand. Doesn't lose anything of great consequence either. And signaling that he is very much intending to play the aggressor here. How do you feel about it?
I like it a lot. I mean, look at his hand. What would he have cared about getting rid of? Spirit Singer Umbra, I guess, was the one card he'd be really sad about losing. Yeah. He didn't have any of the power cards like Cube, Faceless, Gul'dan, another Doomguard, Mountain Giant. He's drawn pretty dead here, I would say, actually.
Having just said how poor that handful of removal was for BloodTrail, suddenly it came in pretty clutch there. I mean, he can't see A8's hand. We can see he doesn't really have anything there to leverage that Doomguard if it did stay alive. But whenever you're playing against Q-Block, you are terrified to leave a Doomguard alive at any given point.
Absolutely. It's very important against a lot of decks, actually, to just instantly remove minions before they can get the crazy combos to go off. Like, as we may get to see later in the series, the Recruit Hunter, where if you don't kill off the Seeping Oozlings, you just get play-deaded until you are actually deaded.
Play-deaded, yeah. Okay. Very, very strange syntax, but yeah, we'll work with it.
Is Sottle still the happiest that Raven isn't here, or...?
Oh, dude, I love you. never change. And please continue to save me from my perpetual nightmare that is casting. I'm kidding. I actually do feel quite bad that we continue to make fun of him despite the fact he is actually sad that he's not here.
It is.
I love you, buddy. Stay strong.
And now I have to soak up the jokes from the rest of the casters.
It's true. You have replaced Raven.
Relentless.
You have replaced Raven not only by sitting next to me while casting, but also being the butt of every single joke backstage as well.
I can almost hear TJ high-fiving Admirable and saying, "Got him."
Yeah. We even have a picture of Derek in the room right now that we can point at.
But still, for A8, none of the real actual power cards with which to use some of these backup support cards on. You can't really just play Tal'Daram because he doesn't have cubes, giants, Doomguards, things like that. In this matchup, he was pretty banking actually on keeping that Doomguard alive so that he could copy it and thus make his Gul'dan as powerful as possible, because Q-Block in this matchup kind of functions very similarly to how I think it was originally proposed to function, where you go for as many Doomguards as possible, and then Blood Reaver Gul'dan is your OTK. You play that and just win the game on the spot. Generally, in a lot of matchups, you don't have the time to do that. But the Taunt Druid is not doing all that much too often, so if you can get your Gul'dan down before their crazy Hadronite stuff, you can just close out the game super quick.
Yeah, and we've had a lot of talk really about how poor BloodTrail's hand is, but it hasn't been working out great for A8 either, and you see here he needs to life tap to draw towards more threats from his deck, but to do that, he has to just discard a Defile and drop a Doomsayer to deny development. It is, again, a decent turn to just drop a Doomsayer.
Yep.
Both of A8's Doomsayers have kind of just been motivated by necessity more than, you know, the perfect timing for them, but his original one shut down the Iron Golem turn. Now he's shutting down the Lich King turn, which is very beneficial for him.
And I absolutely thought he was going to be shutting down the Primordial Drake there as well, but BloodTrail just thinking it's worth to get it in the pool of dead Taunt minions to resurrect with Hadronox.
I actually like it a lot.
Do you like it?
Yeah, I actually, because it's actually hard in this matchup sometimes, because you need to get to a big Hadronox quickly, and a big Hadronox is not a bunch of 3/6s in this matchup. You really want 4/8s, 4/12s, Lich Kings. But each of those takes an entire turn to play out, and you really want to like get it done before they just lock you out with Gul'dan forever.
And, I mean, if you look at the alternatives, I was originally looking at branching paths, just double draw. That's generally what you do in this matchup when you're faced with something like a Doomsayer and you can't activate, or you can't play any of your minions. But with the Ultimate Infestation, a very unfashionable card in Taunt Druid knocking about there as well, BloodTrail has to just make room here, as well as trying to activate the Hadronox. Because like I was saying a little bit earlier, you don't need full power, all the value from all your minions in this matchup. You just need to get your Hadronox on board quickly, so they can't storm you down with Doom Guards.
Yeah, and this is the exact reason why this card became unfashionable. I was a very early adopter of Taunt Druid, and Ultimate Infestation was the very first card that I cut from the deck.
I remember.
Have you heard me talk about how I invented Taunt Druid before, Derek?
Many times.
Okay. I did wonder. Everyone playing Wrath, by the way, can say thank you to me. And also everyone not playing Dark Reaper. No, that was Viper. But I invented Wrath.
You invented Wrath?
I invented Wrath, yeah.
Okay.
It's true.
I'm not even going to go near that big pile of nonsense.
I wonder.
But now for A8, some of those power minions starting to come together with, obviously, the Lackey here in play. He can go about this in a multitude of different ways if he wanted to get as many demons from his deck as possible. We can see stuff like Tal'Daram on the Lackey and things like that, but I think he would much rather go for full power on one demon, because I'm looking at the downside of summoning too many demons from your deck, as you don't get too many Void Lords with your Gul'dan, but I guess he's thinking, I've seen the Hadronox now, I'm pretty far behind, I just need to get these demons out now and seize the board.
Yeah, I don't know, this turn looked pretty good to me.
I mean, yeah. I will agree with you there. It can only be so bad when you fill up your entire board with like 18 mana's worth of cards.
Yeah. I think, you know, you were saying earlier, you know, you kind of like the line where you keep your Gul'dan as Void Lord and more importantly Void Walker light as you can, right? Because you want to steamroll with Doom Guards. But A8 is obviously not on that plan. He just recognizes he can make a huge board state right now with a bunch of Void Lords. And it's still, you know, there's so many problems on this board, right? There's an Umbra that needs to be dealt with, but then if you commit mana to doing that, do you have mana available to then do something impactful with your Hadronox? This is a lot of problems in one small package here from A8.
And it's also the thinking, you know, I may not even need to play Gul'dan for the board to kill off my opponent, because this could be it right here. He obviously drew the Doomguard off the top, so therefore cannot summon it with the Lackey, as I believe that's every demon pulled from his deck at this point.
Right.
But even so, it's still not that bad of a position for him whatsoever, until that Hadronox dies and he sees double Witching Hour knocking about in BloodTrail's hand.
Yeah, he does still have the Spellbreaker as well, which of course, we were talking about do you Spellbreaker a Hadronox immediately in the last game. A8 quite rightly recognized here that it's hard work for BloodTrail to immediately kill his Hadronox that turn. So he can just make a very powerful play where he allocates all his mana for tempo, and then he can probably still Spellbreaker the Hadronox next turn if he really wants to. But I feel like this is a matchup even more so than the last one we watched, where you can wait and get greedy and perhaps Spellbreaker a cube in the late game.
That's a fantastic point, because A83650, by loading up on the board as much as possible, by going for Umbra with Prince Tal'Daram on this turn, basically said, even if you go for cube on this Hadronox and make a measly board with a couple of 4/8s, I just break through it, silence your cube, and then what do? You have to have like 2 Witching Hours to survive.
Faceless and then silence your cube if you want to get really spicy. But honestly, I think that is quite often a trap in the matchup. If you can Faceless more Doom Guards, that's generally better than Facelessing more Taunt minions. But again, A8 might see it differently because he's definitely disagreed on the value of a Doomguard so far. Although playing both from hand does seem to suggest that he is quite eager to have them on board.
For BloodTrail now, some of the more powerful plays coming into effect, as we could obviously see. Witching Hours, and in addition to... Yeah, it's looking like Spellstones Naturalizes, something like that. He has to realize he has to start making defensive plays very quickly.
I like this. Board fill, and then uses his Naturalize to only place one Doomguard in play with the from the cube, and then still has the tools to kill his own Hadronox. But it's not the most impressive board that you're ever going to see. Just 14 points of taunt in play.
And I think this is a pretty big downside of this play, and a big downside of Taunt Druid in general that's often overlooked is that this, well, it's been evinced so far in this game a lot, that it's very hard to kill off your Hadronox and get the death rattle. So with BloodTrail here, very likely able to just storm through all these taunts, get that damage through to face. After that, what does BloodTrail do to make a defensive enough of a play?
So many possibilities.
Great question.
And while you were saying that it can be kind of a trap to go for Faceless on a Hadronox because it, you know, you can't get full power from a Faceless Manipulator going on a Doomguard or a Cube with Doomguards inside it.
Right.
In this instance, just giving him a full board after this is potentially traded off or cleared up would not be that bad. But still, charges to the face.
Counter argument, 5-7. Actually, I was about to suggest that this is perhaps the time for the Spellbreaker. I advocated it can be a position where you use it very greedily in this matchup. This isn't a greedy game from this point, right? This is a smell blood, go in for the kill position. I think Faceless are charging 5-7, and Spellbreaker, the Hadronox, is the most aggressive thing A8 could have done that turn, so I love seeing it.
And this is where, for BloodTrail, I think the most pivotal play he made this game of going for the Naturalize to minimize the amount of Doomguards on the last turn rather than get rid of his own Hadronox is coming into effect, and it's maybe not necessarily that good for him. I suppose this is the worst case scenario where he was met with a Spellbreaker, but for BloodTrail, he kind of needs to anticipate the worst case scenario at every time here, because there's only 3 cards left for his opponent.
Right.
And so if we had seen maybe the Naturalize on his own Hadronox, he could have ignored the fact that his opponent had 2 Doomguards because he would have had a board full of dragons. Yeah,
I wonder if it comes down to a read from BloodTrail, just saying, you know, that Hadronox got to hang around for 2 turns without getting Spellbreakered. I think it's a read that you could talk yourself out of, because, you know, we kind of talked it through as well between us, right? It's not a position where A8 had to Spellbreaker.
Yes.
So I don't think BloodTrail can necessarily rule it out, but it's definitely a line of thinking that he could have gone down and said, you know, there is a world where there's just no Spellbreaker in my opponent's hand. Maybe I'm in a bad position. Maybe that's what I try and leverage.
So pretty devastatingly here for BloodTrail. No cube was found off of the Ultimate Infestation that he played. So A83650 here basically has full reign to just go as aggressive as possible here, and that's exactly what he's doing, sending everything towards the face, hoping to just deny any possibility for a stopping of lethal on the following turn.
So many options for BloodTrail this turn. Doesn't like any of them immediately though. Feels like he has to go fishing.
Yep, looking for exactly that cube, given that both Naturalizers have been played. He finds it off the top. And he's in this game now.
See, how big is this Hadronox? Is it big enough from this point? Oh, that Faceless now on the Doomguard is looking very, very promising, because he has Hellfire alongside that as well.
This is the quickest of maths having to be performed by A8 here.
3, 4 goes in, Doomguard goes in, Doomguard goes in. Yeah, I think he can connect Mountain Giant to face. There's probably a variety of ways to do this, but it looks promising to me.
Yeah, it's looking good to me as well. He definitely wants to maneuver some kind of AoE being used here.
and then he can just either Faceless the Doomguard or Spellstone to get through, and then the Giant connects to face 4 lethal, so that is going to be A8 squaring up the series. He is going to tie up 1-1, and so far we've just been watching Warlocks beat Druids, Derek.
That has exactly been the case. Mounted Giant, when you get it down early, is one hell of a card, and I think that was very nicely played there by A8, because while he had a respectable hand right at the start with the Mounted Giant, it kind of very quickly became very mediocre. He had to play 2 Doomguards just from his hand, discarding what were some pretty unvaluable cards, fortunately for him, in the matchup, but playing very aggressive, similar thinking of just going for quick lethals rather than a fatigue plan.
Yeah, and we didn't really see a great deal of difference between the 2 Warlock decks in that
That's
position,
very true.
Right? Just enough of them beating up Druid, but a little bit more information on the players coming right at you. Well, both of them looking quite emotional about those openers. And then we've got what's coming up next for you as the players sat in their green rooms waiting to come out, as I believe Tansoku and HCT getting ready for the second game of Group A.
Yeah, that could be a pretty good one. HCT, the caster's pick for 2 of you, I believe.
I'm 83, I'm from Poland, but I'm currently living and studying in Germany. I actually had to make a break from the university just to play Hearthstone to prepare for tournaments, but I want to come back and study. The family was pretty skeptic, like negative from the beginning, but then I started making some real money, and that's why they started supporting me. And now they're supporting me a lot, and I really appreciate that.
Bunny Hopper has conceded. A8 is going to the Summer Championships.
I think Hearthstone was pretty easy for me from the time when I started playing it. It's an incredible feeling, of course. I think I've never felt so good in my entire Hearthstone career. It's incredible. I went to the first LAN tournament and I won this one, so I was correct. And then I started competing in more tournaments. I achieved some pretty nice results, and that's why I became competitive. I didn't know that I will get like recognized in Hearthstone, that's why I typed something totally random. Then I just went to a tournament in Poland, like 64 people. I won this tournament, surprisingly, and then everybody was knowing me, and it didn't feel like really changing the nickname after that.
Any report about how far he can go in this tournament?
It's going to be going to the Summer Championships.
I don't know much about BloodTrail.
저도 사실 아무것도 모르는데.
No, I don't know it.
我从台湾的苗栗县过来的，我现在大三。
Competitive questions about who you're playing against and all that stuff first, and then we're going to cut the roll and we're going to go into some more like just, you know, meta questions and freaky questions. Cool?
Well, I love that about BloodTrail. I actually see a lot of parallels with a player that we saw a lot of last year in HCT, Samuel Sao, who really came out of nowhere as well. Again, fairly quiet, unassuming guy, but ended up with perhaps one of the most iconic moments of HCT last year with his little "I did it" celebration. So, you know, even if you are a player where maybe it's a bit of a blood trail from a stone to get any information out of you, I thought you might like that one, Derek.
I did.
Still, you can still write your name in infamy, despite being quite a quiet and unassuming character, it seems.
Exactly, and far from a one-trick pony in his predecessor, as you mentioned, Samuel Tao getting second, I believe, at Seoul recently to Hunter Race. So getting your win here, getting through to the World Championships gets you a lot of fame and that, you know, tournament prowess, because for a lot of these players, when we were interviewing them, we heard about how nerves playing on a big stage can really affect them because they've never experienced anything like this before.
And now, finally, at the third port of call, we will see Taunt Druid get a victory. And it was good. I was just having a conversation with Lorinda through Discord before we came out for this cast. And he was asking, you know, is Taunt Druid perhaps overrated? Is it too easily targetable in these situations? And we spoke to a couple of players in interviews that said I was scared to bring Taunt Druid because I thought it would be the most targeted deck in the tournament. And we, at least in this series, have seen it struggle a little bit, albeit in one matchup that we have seen it come up against those times.
That's true, but I mean, I believe it was Bunny Hopper in interviews saying he thinks bringing Taunt Druid is just bad. It's just too expected. The power level is not high enough to justify how predictable it is in terms of how easy it is to counter. But there's a lot of very strong decks that counter it very efficiently. It's not like you have to play Quest Rogue at the moment or something silly like that. Sorry, killing all day. In order to have a chance against it, it's fairly easy with the likes of the Miracle Rogue, Control Mage, something like that, to get a very good matchup against it.
Right. Well, there is Mr. Oakheart, to give him his full and formal title. Of course, one of the most crucial cards in the matchup. Is A8 rocking one Dragon Hatcher, or is he playing two?
I think they're both playing the one Dragon Hatcher, one Sleepy Dragon version, which I don't personally favor, because I feel even though you are drawing some mediocre to bad cards in this matchup, like Dragon Hatcher and Sleepy Dragon, if you can get the most powerful Oakheart every single time, it doesn't really matter what the other cards in your hand do, because you've probably already won.
Right. It's strange to me. Oakheart is starting to become a powerful effect outside of this deck. It was messed around with very early on. Warlock to find Void Lords and the kind of Drakari Enchanter double activation Druid trick was played with early on, and that's actually coming back with a vengeance right now. There's a few people messing around with big Druid style decks that are more or less, you know, Hadronox Druid without the Hadronox and just packing in more late game threats alongside.
Or some people playing Big Druid with Hadronox, but just without the Witching Hour and Cube stuff, just saying because you've still got some dragons in there, the Lich King, stuff like that, it's worth going for one activation on Hadronox when you get it off of Master Oakheart.
That's your boy Boar Control you're referring to again, isn't it?
It is once again.
Do we need a Boar Control counter for Derek like we need a Killing All Day counter for TJ?
Hey, George. So while for A8 here, he has found, as you mentioned, that crucial card in Master Oakheart. There's a couple of things working against that pretty strongly in that he hasn't found the necessary ramp to get there in a timely fashion. And also he's found both Dragon Hatcher and Trog Gloom Eater before he was even able to play it. So it's only going to be getting him either a copy of Ironwood Golem or obviously the Hadronox itself. So this is really not the kind of hand for he's looking for in this scenario.
What kind of impact does Gloom Eater have on the mirror? Is it, I can see it being swinging both ways because it's not aggressive. You can't deal huge amounts of face damage to it, but at the same time, it kind of does help break those constant stalemates that you get in the late game where 4/8s don't trade into 4/12s, right, and vice versa.
I mean, I was talking about this at DreamHack Summer, which is where I first saw the Gloom Eater being played, where I think it was Seiko who was leading the curve on that one with bringing the Gloom Eater. And like you say, it doesn't do very much damage at all, but just being the last player to stick a board, I think is more important than the individual attack values, because once you do have a big board of taunts and your opponent doesn't, you just go for the branching paths and kill them anyway. The attack value doesn't really matter. I find that why cards like the Tar Creeper are so miserable in this matchup aren't because they don't deliver enough base damage, it's because they don't trade. You just end up behind on board every single time.
Yep.
Go away.
Lich King is kind of the antithesis of everything we've been talking about, right? If Tar Creeper is at the bottom end of the scale with things that you want to revive in this matchup, then Lich King is right at the top. But there is unfortunately a great disruption turn here from BloodTrail, which is really something that you do start to develop as you get deeper into learning the intricacies of Hearthstone. Is not necessarily what's the best play for me, what's the worst play for my opponent? Like, what can I do that makes him the most miserable? Sometimes it lines up perfectly, and it's both, which is what it is here for BloodTrail. Dragon Hatcher was his best play, but it also disrupts turn 8, a crucial turn for A8.
We're seeing that a lot in particular respect to Master Oakheart, because while it is pretty much the most powerful individual card play we have in Hearthstone at the moment, it's unreactive. It doesn't deal with something on the board. So if you can stick something like a Gadgets and Auctioneer on the board, or the Dragon Hatcher here, you can really start to mess with your opponent's ability to do their powerful stuff.
Yeah, so look in the difference in power level of play here that A8 has to come out with. It's just, 4 mana Holy Light, as I heard you call it the other day, and then swipe the Dragon Hatcher as opposed to drop a Lich King. That is a massive difference.
All the difference in the world. And now BloodTrail has initiative once again. You can go with the Hadronox here. Obviously does not need to go for the Naturalize on it straight away because there's no Transform or Silence effect in the Taunt Druid. And if A8 doesn't kill it off on this turn, which he is going to massively struggle with doing, the cube just comes down on the following turn. And even if he doesn't, it would just be Witching Hour cube. BloodTrail has got himself into such a good position here.
This is just a Primordial Drake being summoned now, right? I believe, from the Dragon Hatcher.
Obviously, from where BloodTrail is sitting, he does not know how many dragons are in his opponent's hand, so very possibly 2 more dragons able to come out of the deck for him. So he will, I would imagine, be prioritizing getting rid of that. But I don't know, this turn still feels pretty good to me. I guess Wrath actually doesn't quite kill it off on its own.
She's somewhat awkward, isn't it? No, Cycle's looking for an answer, and everything's coming up BloodTrail right now. It's cube off the top in the previous game, gave him a chance that did not come to fruition, but at least kept him hoping, and there's the swipe draw that he needed that was very, very crucial. It's obviously, as you said, not quite as bad for him to leave that the Dragon Hatcher alive, because it's just another 4/8 that's coming out. It's not pulling the 4/12 that's in hand for A8, but from BloodTrail's perspective, that was a massive draw to pick up the answer.
And another very interesting talking point there from BloodTrail. We know that if you are foolish enough, some might say, to be playing a Tar Creeper in your Taunt Druid deck, you don't play it in this matchup because it dilutes your pool too much. But BloodTrail there, choosing to go for hero power over the Ironwood Golem. I think just saying, in this instance, I don't really care about getting this extra defensive tool down, because even if my first Hadronox is very weak by comparison, with 2 Witching Hours and 2 cubes in hand, he's just going to overwhelm his opponent with slightly bigger dragons quicker than he would with an Ironwood Golem. I think it's actually a pretty heads-up play.
I actually love it. It's very easy to underestimate how quickly Ironwood Golems snowball. Because you very often get 2 of them into play when you've only got, say, your 1 Sleepy Dragon, 1 Primordial Drake,
that's right,
no Lich King, whatever it is. And then if you summon 2 from your first Hadronox, then there's 4 in your pool. And then you summon 4 from your second Hadronox, and eventually you're just resurrecting a full board of 3 6s and just minimizing your opportunities to get Lich Kings and 4/12s. BloodTrail, as we mentioned, just wants some 4/12s in his life. And that is the way to do it. He's now got 1 res coming back off the initial Hadronox. He has 2 more in that cube, and then he has whatever else needs to come out of that Hadronox by the time that that dies. A8 does have a potential clear on it right now if he wanted to do that, if his Spellstone is upgraded enough. But again, it's already a pretty impressive Hadronox that would come out. Another, 11 power will be added to the board.
That's right. And Again, I find myself saying this a lot. I quite like this play from BloodTrail because very often in this matchup, you're finding yourself in a position where you have 6 minions on board and a cube with Hadronoxes inside, at which point they can abuse the fact that you're only allowed 7 minions on board, and so you only get 1 minion off of that Hadronox. So BloodTrail here going for the cube on the Sleepy Dragons instead. It's a little bit more of an aggressive play, I think. Not too greedy, because he knows in terms of value, at least in the immediate, he's so far ahead.
Of course, the big difference here at Championships than basically any other HCT event leading up to this is the players are head-to-head, and we haven't seen too much chicanery go on so far in our opening games, but if you've been following HCT for a while, you've seen what the likes of Pavel can do when he's able to make eye contact with his opponent, just in terms of trying to take them out of the moment, just make them not have as much time as they can to think about their play because they're too busy wondering what on earth Pavel's doing making eyes at you from over the monitor.
I mean, the Taiwan All-Star Major, like game one, the first game he played, he just started laughing at his opponent right at the start. And it was extremely off-putting. Even as a caster, I was like, what is it? What's he seen that's so funny?
Oh, I love Pavel.
I don't think there was anything there. Here we go, the attack on your minions matters a lot less when you can buff them up to this crazy point. And now not even an ability for A8 to kill off his own Hadronox without some other external means of damaging it a little bit more, which, you know, he very likely will have access to from where BloodTrail is sitting. But even so, he knows even if there's a big board of minions from his opponent due to the Hadronox, he can just go Witching Hour Cube once again.
He's got all the tools, and all the while he's dumping his hand as well. If he ever needs to get down to that Ultimate Infestation refill, then he has that on deck without taking any risk of burning key options from the remainder of his deck. But with only 8 cards remaining, it remains to be seen whether he's going to need it. It might just be for that final push to get over the line, if anything. A8 is now just kind of scrambling.
Without the ability to get enough value from his Witching Hours unless he finds a cube of his own, he could be starting to struggle here massively. And Frostmourne is often one of the best cards you can get in this matchup because of the huge amount of value it provides later on if you're going to a fatigue plan, or at least to the point where you're both starting to run out of Hadronoxes. But it looks to me like A8 could just be under too much pressure to actually get any real value out of it.
It's the impact of the Gloom Eater we were talking about.
Pretty good here.
Yeah. Since BloodTrail has all the initiative here with his trades, the Poisonous Minion was kind of the most frustrating to deal with in that spot.
Now BloodTrail's in a situation where he kind of just wants to clear off all these minions on his board so that he can actually get to the point where his cube can die to get these Sleepy Dragons back onto the board, and where his Hadronox can die so he can fill up his board with taunts again, because now we're in that situation where the board is pretty full and Hadronox will not be able to get the full value out of it.
Yeah, life has just become a little bit awkward here for BloodTrail for the first time, because as you mentioned, his Hadronox is just kind of begging to be popped here for minimal value. Spellstone would do it, Wrath would do it, Swipe, if he could just potentially swipe a minion that doesn't die, or Swipe Face, yeah.
And an interesting thing there that I saw BloodTrail kind of wondering about at the end there was actually whether to kill off the dragon from his opponent, which was obviously more threatening, or just this Ironwood Golem, because you obviously want to kill off the more threatening minions so it can't trade back into your board immediately. But if there is a resurrection, you want to punish your opponent as much as possible for having to play these Ironwood Golems.
What to do?
Obviously with it having more resurrected on the next Hadronox.
One thing BloodTrail does still have going for him, though, is he still has a ton of aggression built up through this line that sent him down resurrecting 412s over and over. A8 did get his Lich King into the pool, and he picked up a very good card in terms of value, the Frostmourne, from it, but it's a little slow for him in this position. My eyes scanned, and for a second I thought he'd whiffed on the Lich King, but no, he's just hanging out, chilling on the far right.
Yeah, I've not had the best options here off of Lich King. Obviously, I think the premier option is Anti-Magic Shell, just to buff your board up to a point where your opponent simply cannot deal with it. Maybe Death Grip as well to get a key minion from your opponent. But in this scenario for BloodTrail, he's got still some very strong options available to him. I would imagine trying to sacrifice off some of his minions, maybe just attacking both of his Sleepy Dragons into the Trog Gloom Eaters after a swipe to kill them off, just so he has more Sleepy Dragons coming out of the Hadronox.
Yeah, it's a bit it's like it's a weird looking play because you're essentially killing 2 Sleepy Dragons to make sure that you revive 2 Sleepy Dragons with your Hadronox, right? But the upside that you get is dealing with the Glue Meters, which does need to be done, of course, at some point. So yeah, it does make sense.
And the effect snowballs as well. You're meaning that on the next turn you're going to have even more Sleepy Dragons, most likely, as BloodTrail gets, you know, again, a pretty mediocre outcome here, or middle of the road. 3 Sleepy Dragons looks pretty good, I suppose.
My hand is too full.
That's a path, that's some burst damage that's gone down the drain.
Very important.
And the fatigue count is now leveled up with the Naturalize being used from BloodTrail, but A8 still has a Naturalize in hand. So if no one makes a breakthrough here, this game is likely to resolve in A8's favor, since BloodTrail looks like he's going to be fatiguing first from this position.
BloodTrail here, by going for the Naturalize, I can obviously see the reasoning for it, as you mentioned, burning a card, as well as dealing with a very big, scary minion. But it means that he's less able to deny his opponent cube value, because if A8 ends up with a single Hadronox on the board, as well as a bunch of taunts,
it's true.
Naturalize could have been very, very valuable to BloodTrail to kill that off, so that the cube essentially becomes an awful lot worse then, because cubing something like a Drake or a Sleepy Dragon is a hell of a lot worse than going for it on a Hadronox at this late stage in the game.
Yeah.
Time waits for no one.
He's just going to keep on trucking here. He's been making Hadronoxes every turn for the last 3 turns, and he sees no reason to stop just yet. Only 4 rolls this time for 2 Lich Kings, does not find one. I think he was probably unfavored to find a Lich King in that spot. Now, Branching Paths is in hand alongside a Naturalizer that could be used to push through the 412. Still not looking too promising.
Yeah. Well, actually, going for some kind of an immediate lethal setup. Obviously, there's no lethal available on this immediate turn. If you go for the play, as you mentioned, naturalizing the Sleepy Dragon, going for a full buff on Branching Paths, it could be the fact that your opponent actually cannot kill off the cube, and then a Hadronox inside it as well.
Right.
Fairly tall order,
but yeah, in order to make that happen, you have to not buff.
Right, that's what I was.
Because yeah, if you end up with a 6-power minion on board, then suddenly you're asking your opponent to do exactly that. Apologize, I misspoke on the earlier turn. Did not realize BloodTrail still had a Naturalize of his own left. Which means actually the fatigue count is much closer than I initially suggested.
And so now we're in a situation where BloodTrail has basically gone for the play I was highlighting, but, you know, done correctly, one might argue, where the cube is even harder to actually be killed off here. He could, however, go for what? Attack in Spellstone and then cube the Hadronox inside. It seems pretty kind of convoluted, but it's those kind of plays you need to be making to survive here.
Not seeing anything else that's too appealing. Of course, you were talking about Lich King cards earlier. Doom Pact is one that you didn't mention that can actually be extraordinary in a lot of situations. You basically get a full board reversal where you kill all your opponent's minions and then kill your own Hadronox at the same time. Would have been very, very nice in this position. Yeah, as you suggested, the cube is going to have to come out here on the Hadronox. And again, no Lich King, but does get the Poisonous, does get the 412, which will take big chunks out of this remaining board now from BloodTrail.
However, as we can see for BloodTrail, still obviously the ability to go Witching Hour Cube at any point later on down the line, that he wants to take a shot at resurrecting his own Lich Kings later on down the line, as well as obviously seeing what he can get out of the box right away. Something like, as we mentioned, Anti-Magic Shell. Maybe if it gets to that position, a board clear could be good in the form of Death and Decay or Doom Pact.
Now in this position you will probably favour taking multiple minions off the board as opposed to just killing a 412 to mitigate the effect of Branching Paths. Again, Frostmourne, probably not what you're looking for here. It's just a little too slow. When you're capable of the power turns that Taunt Druid is in the late game, 7 mana equip a weapon just is very rarely enough to get the job done.
And I think as we enter this super late stage of the game where both players are obviously fighting to get that one board that sticks right at the end, This is the point where I maybe start to question BloodTrail's use of Naturalize as a card in this match.
Okay.
So I think both times he used it just on a Sleepy Dragon, which is, you know, fairly valuable in the matchup because you can just push forward some damage, maybe go for an aggressive early lethal. But as we can clearly see now, A83650 obviously has drawn his entire deck, so he's had just as much value as his opponent in this stage of the game. And now the Naturalizers could be very, very useful indeed to kill off a Hadronox when there's already a full board, which could give BloodTrail that one more refill that his opponent does not have. Because BloodTrail has not made the absolute highest possible value plays so far this game. He went for Cube on a Sleepy Dragon rather than Cube on a Hadronox.
Yep. It definitely looked like a position where he was going to potentially be able to push through aggression, and maybe Branching Paths was going to get him over the line. But as promising as it can look in the Taunt Druid mirror, it almost always comes down to this kind of stalemate in the late game, because both decks' defensive tools are just vastly superior to their offensive tools.
I mean, yesterday we were playing a game that looked surprisingly like this when we were having lunch, and I was trying to go like BloodTrail, very aggressive, set up a board that my opponent couldn't deal with, and then go for an early lethal, rather than the fatigue plan, going for the most high-value plays possible. I lost, you know, worth pointing out. I did lose miserably in that matchup.
Spoilers, it did not end well. BloodTrail did go for the Frostmourne line here. And A8 says, all right, buddy, we can, if you're going to take a turn to play 7 mana, do nothing, I will do the same. That is 4, 8, 12, 15, 19, 25 damage being pushed this turn.
And that for BloodTrail is very bad, because minions that go into, or damage that goes into his stodged up board full of minions is very good for him. That's what he wants to happen, rather than going through to his face. Because now look, they're both in fatigue. He's at so much less health.
Yes. He does have, what, gain 18 in hand with the 2 armor cards, but yeah, that huge chunk of damage that he just took what was a very even fatigue game to a very, very bad looking one, with A8 got to push a ton of damage and still has a Naturalize in hand.
Maybe that from BloodTrail was just a bit of a misread. I mean, he's obviously afraid of situations like exactly this, where because A8 kept the perfect combo of Spellstone into Naturalize, this is what I was talking about, that BloodTrail should probably have been moving towards. And now because of that, it looks like A8 might just be able to make a board that his opponent cannot deal with, because there's still a cube that still has Hadronoxes inside it.
One miserable Ironwood Golem is all he got from that final Hadronox.
And you can just finally see now for A8, he had this in his mind for so long. He was saving those for specifically this scenario, because he knew it would happen. These cards, or these decks, when you see them play out right to the end, in these scenarios, you see a lot of repetition in terms of how they end up.
I think the 2 4-attack minions go into the 4-8 here, right? And then you just kill a 3-6 with your Frostmourne. I don't think it's super relevant, like, which minions you end up reviving with your Frostmourne here. I just don't think the game's getting to that point. So I just take the most efficient board clear route. Interesting. So now Branching Paths. This just doesn't have the armor. He'd have to Oaken Summons to get the armor to activate the Ironwood Golems, and then Branching Paths to attack twice.
I'm just not sure if it's there, because at this point he can gain a whole bunch of armor. Yes, he'll be getting back Sleepy Dragon and stuff like this, but with 2 Hadronoxes available to A8, and obviously still the potential to get something like a Lich King, it looks like A8 could just lock out this game, because he took consistently the higher value plays than his opponent.
Well, the question is, when do these Hadronoxes die? Because it's not right now. And that means the BloodTrail gets to push damage again next turn. Although A8 does have those Taunt minions inside his Frostmourne.
And he did make the play last turn to go for getting back a Primordial Drake, rather than one of these golems, which should give him potentially that little bit of extra survivability just to bite him through, and then obviously on the next turn.
Right. So it's kind of arguable because he got back the bigger taunt minion from his Frostborn, but he also took apart less of his opponent's board in doing so. There would have been one less minion in play, I believe, to get buffed by that branching paths. So there's some swings and roundabouts going on there for sure.
Yeah, I think I would still agree. Just can't afford to be too greedy here. Man, that is a board that BloodTrail is not getting through. And now while these Hadronoxes may just never ever die, they're just 3-3s. BloodTrail ends up conceding. A8 with a beautifully played game in the Taunt Mirror. Super greedy play throughout, leads himself through to a victory.
Yeah, settling, guys. Our first series was a marathon. This second one is looking like it's not going to be far short of the length, and that's pretty much what we have throughout the tournament, outside of Turner and a couple of other players like Killing All Day who brought more aggressive lineups. But it's kind of where the meta game is right now, just incredibly intricate late game interactions like we're seeing from these Warlocks, Druids, Mages that we've been watching so far.
And that's why I find in this tournament, this meta in particular, more so than innate game knowledge, just making sure you do your homework is so important, because in that matchups, even though I think, you know, BloodTrail made some pretty cool plays, they looked very flashy at the time, going for early lethals, I think it was slightly better matchup understanding from A8 there, going for the super late game, always very greedy, because he will have just studied that matchup so intensely to make sure he's ready for those scenarios.
Yeah, well, while the players get ready for our next game, let's take a moment to hear a little bit from Team 5.
Developers. The esports scene in Hearthstone being as friendly and as interactive as it is, I would have to say is probably, at least in part, attributed to the fact that it really is intended to be a game for everyone. It's meant to be easy to learn, easy to get into.
We always wanted Hearthstone to be kind of a warm, friendly, welcoming game, and although there is this competitive aspect to it, we've strived to make the game very friendly.
Oh, are you watching? Are you watching right now?
Well, I think the vibe of Hearthstone itself is one about coming together. You know, it's about the tavern, it's about all these people, races coming together across time and space to enjoy a game of Hearthstone together. And I think that vibe actually really carries over into real life when you're playing Hearthstone.
I think there's a lot of charm and whimsy to Hearthstone that kind of keeps it lighthearted.
I think it's a little bit harder to get too tilted over something that's just like inherently a little bit goofy.
It's legendary. There's also the fact that it's a single player. It means there's not as much inter-team conflict that can occur, and you know, negative play happens, the player kind of knows, you know, oh, I made a mistake, or I'll keep that in mind, I'll do better next time.
It's very important to have really good practice partners in Hearthstone, and especially if you want to be a competitive player, and sharing ideas, sharing strategies, and a lot of what's best about Hearthstone is when you're playing with friends and trying to work together to solve the problem of a specific tournament.
Despite it being like competitive, you still are having a great time with it, and you still have moments that you laugh about. Sometimes cynically when all 8 missiles hit face or something.
That's gonna happen to you, right? Like that's kind of what makes the game great in some respects. You're just having a lot of really cool Ragnaros shots hitting you and missing you, and like having the bullet whiz by your head and hit your minion, and like that that heart palpitation going, and like those moments are just core to Hearthstone, I think.
I've never actually taken 8 to the face from Ragnaros and thought that was such a cool Ragnaros shot. I don't know. Maybe I'm just salty.
I think it's more when they miss you. You're like, oh, love Ragnaros. What a cool card.
I guess there are two sides to every coin. Maybe I just need to stop being such a pessimist. But enough about me. There is a very important deck coming up. In fact, 2 of them. These are what we set up as the big talking points in the 2 lineups, and they are very conveniently, for the sake of the narrative, going to run into each other directly. It's the Control Priest, the Mind Blast Priest from A8 going up against this Recruit Hunter from BloodTrail that, remember, A8 called out and said he did not feel like it was a very good deck for Conquest.
That's exactly right. And while he may not feel like it's a very good deck for Conquest, I think it's a pretty good deck against him. It's generally a very anti-control deck, and A8 has a very control-ish lineup. Once that Miracle Rogue is banned out of the way, it should be very easy to take a win. And for A8, his signature twist here in the Control Priest, when he was describing it, I found it very interesting, because one of the things we said was he wants to face aggro. I think that's his kind of justification for bringing it, but I would argue the main reason, upon talking to him about it, is it's just kind of a comfort pick, a signature pick. He loves this deck so much, so that even though most players would agree it's not in the best shape right now, generally you don't want to be bringing it to a tournament because it has a lot of very poor matchups. He thinks he's good enough with the deck, he can play it so well that he will still be able to pilot himself through to a victory.
I think comfort picks are very, very important. It's, you will not achieve the stated win rate of a deck if you are not comfortable with it. You know, win rates assume perfect play, and if you have not gone into the lab with a deck that you should bring because it's favorable, then you're not going to pick up that 60% win rate in this matchup that the stats say that you might have.
And I think that's what we heard a lot of the players talking about in interviews about specifically control mages, that they do not feel comfortable enough with the deck because, while not too much has changed from pre-rotation, with the inclusion of Voodoo Doll and the Keysmith as well, there's a couple of things you have to consider that have changed a little bit in that matchup.
Yeah, so you can see a couple of key cards of the Recruit Hunter on the right-hand side. We kind of glossed over this deck just in passing, Derek. For the uninitiated, why don't you explain exactly what this deck does? Because it's kind of nonsense.
It's pretty cool, if you ask me. Yeah. Very different from any other Hunter deck we've seen, because generally with Hunter you just play aggressive. It's the way the hero power demands you to play. But this is a deck that utilizes some of the most crazy battle cry and death rattle interaction you possibly can. By going for the Seeping Oozling generally as often as you can on turn 6, you are then copying the death rattle of Silver Vanguard or Katharina Winterwisp to pull out Charged Devil Saws and King Crush itself as it finally sees its play from the deck, just to destroy your opponent before they can go for any kind of counterplay.
Yeah, it is definitely a much-needed diversion from usual Hunter things that we have seen for nigh on 4 years now. Either mid-range or incredibly aggressive tools that just weave in that hero power when they can try and deal damage. This is not really a deck that's concerned with hero power rate. They allocate all their mana, or would like to at least, just on powerful plays, getting huge sticky minions and charge minions into play.
That's right. It's one of those weird decks that has such a powerful combo it can pull off that it doesn't care that its hero power works basically 0% with what the game plan, or not 0%, but not generally with what you're trying to do. It's very similar to Shadowwalk Shaman, where in a lot of mirrors you just never touch the hero power button after a certain point because you don't want totems back in your hand from Grumble.
Yeah, I always used to say to people, you know, if I was streaming, you get the question a lot, like, you know, I packed this legendary, is it safe to disenchant? If that legendary was King Crush, I used to 100% advise yes. You can safely disenchant it because it will never get played over Leroy. Because why would you King Crush when you can Leroy hero power as Hunter, right? It just makes no sense. Well, the answer is you just recruit it for less than 9 mana. That's when King Crush actually gets played.
One of people's favorite things, I think, about this meta is just so many cards that have been in the dumpster for so long. You'd never even consider playing them, and you're having to dust off your raid leaders, Armani Berserkers, and
Stormwind
King
Champions.
Crushers, yeah, all that kind of nonsense. As BloodTrail finally is starting to get some of the cards you're really looking for in this matchup. Katharina Winterwisp, I have to be honest, I'm surprised it took so long for Katharina to actually find its spot in the meta, because objectively, it's such an absurdly powerful card utilizing the recruit effect, and I think the best way we see from any card outside of maybe a pre-nerf lackey.
Sure. I think the big problem was just does Hunter ever want to pay 8 mana for anything, right? That was the question. Occasionally Ragnaros was hanging around in various meta games for the chance to deal 8 damage to your opponent's face. That was what it took to get them to play a card that expensive. But as we mentioned, this is just such a different game plan. It's just very, very refreshing to see, and I hope this style of Hunter just stays around for a long time, quite honestly.
I would absolutely agree with
I would also love to have Leper Gnomes and Wolf Riders available at the same time. You know, if there could be a couple of viable Hunter decks, that's fine too.
Yeah, does Katharina Winter Wisping some kids have the same effect as Wolf Ridering some kids?
No,
Yeah.
no, Wolf Ridering some kids is just the most satisfying thing to do and say in Hearthstone.
As we have been talking about this matchup pretty conceptually rather than specifically with this matchup, because for both decks, they haven't really done the power things they want to do yet. Most of the, or pretty much all of the minions available to this Hunter deck before you go into turn 6 are just anti-aggro tools. It's a way to bridge yourself through to the late game plays like this right here, where it gets an awful lot more interesting.
Yeah, and this is actually something we were talking about in the green room right before we came out here, is that Psychic Scream is generally one of Priest's best removal tools against a lot of these combo-based decks, because you can disrupt them so heavily. Well, if you scream beasts back into their deck, they can just recruit them back out again later on in the game. The conclusion that we came to is that you really just want to kind of scream the activators, right? Because then they're slowed down having to draw those activators from their deck again. And, you know, the amount of beasts that are in there don't really matter if the activators are all buried in there as well. And I do wonder whether it's perhaps ever a world to like hold on to a Stitch Tracker in the late game as a Hunter to play around that kind of situation. I don't know, the wheels are turning right now, and I don't know where they're ending up.
Right,
but
it's worth considering because there is a very low amount of draw in this deck, basically 0 actually. Like you said, it's Discover off of the Stitch Tracker to try and get you through to those power cards, as we see another cornerstone of the deck in Deathstalker Rexar available here to BloodTrail. And he needs to be very careful about how he decides to play this out now, because obviously the big boy himself, King Crush, looks very tempting on this turn just to try and set up for a 2-turn lethal. But if you give your opponent a big tempo swing of the perfect turn to set up their Shadow Reaper and, or maybe Twilight Acolyte in combination with the Cabal Shadow Priest we see in deck, things could start to go very wrong indeed, as he does give A8 the perfect opportunity for that Death Knight.
Just plays the boy, and now the Mind Blaster's stacking up in hand as well. Wonder whether BloodTrail was ever worried about giving his opponent a chance to develop, you know, with other cards that aren't Shadow Reaper Anduin, right? Because Deathstalker Rexar actually gave a full turn over to A8 to develop anything of his choosing. For example, he could have just Alex Straza'd BloodTrail if he'd have played Deathstalker Rexar. And that's kind of equally miserable. So yes, that play looks silly when you have caster vision and you can see the options. But in general, having an 8/8 on board blocks A8's options more than having nothing on board.
Job's done. And so now I was going to start talking about, as we saw A8 with the Shadow Reaper Anduin online, if he could get an Alex Straza, it would look at a first glance like it would be difficult for him to lose. None of the real power plays available to BloodTrail right yet, but there in that exact zombies, getting the Vicious Scalehide as well as the Beetle can gain him a tremendous amount of health.
And 2 Playdeads in hand.
Oh yeah, that's pretty sick.
Do you ever just divert to just outlasting the burst from the Priest?
I'm going to go with no, unless you're very desperate, but it's definitely something to consider.
Ooh. That is a large gentleman off the top for BloodTrail.
And you are looking for nothing but the largest of gentlemen if you are BloodTrail. He's pretty much looking for, exactly as we mentioned earlier, Seeping Oozling, maybe one of the beasts themselves in the form of Charged Devilsaur, but really the cards that pull the beasts from the deck.
Yeah, and Silver Vanguard would again get activated now, right? Because Katharina got reshuffled off the Psychic Scream, so yes. Silver Vanguard is a viable lore as well.
Or it could even just get one of the Charged Devilsaurs.
That's true.
So pretty much every one of the big cards available to BloodTrail in terms of Seeping Oozling, Vanguard, or Katharina itself is a very live draw at this point. Interestingly enough, BloodTrail opting to not even go for the Lich King here, instead trying to sneak in that damage with the beasts. It definitely does appear that he's still on plan A of what he was going for with King Crush, of just setting up a nice quick lethal against his opponent, because this Bear Shark, even once it loses the stealth, is tremendously difficult for A8 to deal with. He can't target it, obviously, with his new hero power from Shadow Reaper Anduin, or even a Holy Fire. It's just pretty much impenetrable to everything the Priest is trying to do.
Yeah, you're not wrong. I wonder whether, you know, BloodTrail is now scared of getting one individually huge minion down into play, especially when it's a Lich King, because of the threat of those Cabal Shadow Priest combos, right? Where stealing a Lich King for A8 could then suddenly find him, you know, ultimate win conditions, like even Death Grip to deny a lot of value from BloodTrail's deck.
So we're seeing A8 playing very aggressively with the hero powers here. If he were to pick up a Mind Blast off the top, I believe that would be 1 damage off lethal as I start to, or 2 damage as I start to remember the break points for Mind Blast and hero
16.
Power. Yeah. And I suppose the other thing to consider is he's obviously afraid of a Vicious Scale Hide for burst healing, because I think that's pretty much the only burst heal that you can get as the Hunter here. If he doesn't play any minions, however, Rush cannot activate on that Vicious Scale Hide.
I'll tell you what can activate, though, and that's Armor Gain with the Play Dead, Derek.
It's actually happening.
Yes, it is.
You're a genius, Soto. That is a very cute play from BloodTrail, and
okay. So you're saying there's a chance?
I mean, there's a chance for both players here. If there's no more lifesteal available to BloodTrail, A8 can just Psychic Scream here, keep pushing all the damage through to the face, and hope that a lot of these Zombeasts end up whiffing.
No, that was my reaction to the Psychic Scream draw. You're saying there is a chance for A8. He needed a way to deal with this board, and that Psychic Scream pickup is exactly what he needed. Can also use the coin here to convert into damage. It would have been perfect mana utilization, but chooses to ooze the candle shot while he can. Of course, he could have gone ping, Psychic Scream coin ping to actually get full usage out of that coin as 2 damage.
So now, potentially leading myself to be a little bit results-oriented here as BloodTrail does
love a bit of results orientation.
As he picks up the Seeping Oozling right off the top there. The Play Dead would have been absolutely fantastic. He's still obviously got the 2 charged Devil Saws in his deck, as well as the Witchwood Grizzlies, which are obviously not quite as good. So could start turning up the pressure a lot quicker. And maybe BloodTrail here being cowed into a play that was a bit too defensive, which, I mean, is a very real benefit of A8's play. This didn't happen by accident. Going for the play of pure Holy Fire to the face clearly is going to scare your opponent a great deal.
Well, okay, I will counter your results-oriented thinking with pure logic, Derek. No, so there's a couple of things that he had to factor in there. Firstly, he was at 18, and his opponent had pushed damage the turn before. So by healing at least once, he gets out of 3 Mind Blast range, right?
Had he already played Shadow Visions for that Mind Blast?
I'm not sure at that point. I couldn't answer you that. But also with Skulking Geist in hand, those Play Deads, with Skulking Geist in the deck for A8, those Play Deads can also just go down the toilet and not be usable at some point in the matchup. So why not get use out of them at some point while you can?
I like that point. I'll take that.
I liked 50% of the things that you said. I'll take that.
The shadows grow short.
Now A8 again trying to seize the initiative in terms of pressure, just finish off his opponent as quick as he can. And clearly we can see BloodTrail has some pretty good answers with the Death Coil of his own, but maybe he again would need to save that for healing on himself. But he doesn't have a choice here, really. That is too threatening of a minion.
Your magic shall not save you.
Now, finally, that Oozling does come down, and oh, that's something that I hadn't considered.
What?
The Death Rattle getting shuffled back into the deck. Yes, it's Armor Gain, but it's not a huge bomb now for that Oozling. That Psychic Scream for A8 was even more clutch than I initially considered.
I mean, it's obviously bad. You'd rather get the Death Rattle of a 7/7, but
it's obviously bad.
It's not that bad. Like, you could have a benefit. You gain yourself 3 armor at the end of it. Because if the game carries on like this, eventually A8 will just run out of stuff to activate the hero powers. I suppose that's a long way off.
Yeah. I think,
but at least, I suppose I should say, in the immediate, in terms of populating the board, A8 will fall out of favor eventually. BloodTrail will be able to seize this because he has an endless stream of beasts.
I think potentially, like a better way to look at it is that he doesn't need the pressure from the Death Rattle to be able to end the game, right? So from there, having a little bit of extra armor gain might be worthwhile. And you can see A8 definitely feels like that little bit of armor gain is worthwhile, and he throws out that Master Spell to deal with it.
As this single Zombeast has already gained him 9 armor, I believe, at this point, and is showing no signs of slowing down.
No, it's only 6, right? It's only the 2 play deads, because it got Psychic Screamed, and now it just got silenced there when it died that time.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Only 6, then.
Only 6. Wind Fury!
All plus attack. All tremendous options.
Oh, come on.
I mean, can't be targeted.
Yeah, can't be targeted. Yeah, makes sense.
And we are finally starting to see, as we both mentioned, as we both agreed upon, A8 falling pretty decidedly behind on board until he can activate this copy of Duskbreaker with no dragons in hand quite yet.
Something that we haven't really looked at a great deal. When was that Duskbreaker lost in terms of dragon activation, and was it done necessarily?
I mean, I think he's only had the 2 Duskbreakers in terms of dragons so far this game. No Drakes, no Alexstrasza.
Yeah.
Or a Twilight Drake right at the start as well. Just trying to find some way of activating it because, as we can see, the untargetable effect coming in very strong here for BloodTrail.
Oh, hello. Gonna play it though. He's gonna use that with that Duskbreaker instead. Both of them gave him pretty nice answers to the board state, but this allows him to push extra damage to face, crucially, which is where he needs to be. And now I believe that is a Shadow Vision Mind Blast that he has in his hand, the right-hand copy, meaning one of these 8 remaining cards is a 3rd copy of Mind Blast potentially. Suddenly he's getting back into range.
I mean, he's just got lethal next turn. BloodTrail has to make some kind of a defensive play.
How's 2 Flame Elementals and a Zombeast that's a Nesting Rock?
That'll do.
It's good for BloodTrail to recognize it though, right? He understood that he needed a Taunt Minion that turn.
I mean, with A8's play and the fact that BloodTrail will obviously be envisioning the worst case scenario, I think, in this, you know, it's his first champs. He needs to be... He will probably be playing a bit more defensively than potentially he should.
Sure.
But he is going to be putting his opponent on 2 copies of Mind Blast at this point.
Oh yeah, the statistics say for sure that you have drawn 1. Or not for sure, but an overwhelming amount of the time you've drawn 1 and then you've seen a Shadow Vision get cast and the card not get used. So it just makes sense.
And given that he also saw both copies of Psychic Scream used before the Shadow Visions, which is the only other spell you'd really consider copying, I think.
Probably.
I mean, there's very few spells in the deck. The Holy Fire was used. The Master Spell was used. I don't think there's really much else he could choose.
Yeah. A8 choosing to continue answering board state here as opposed to just sending a huge amount of damage to face with double Mind Blast options in hand.
I think this is fine because it still pushes a decent amount of pressure through to the face because you get the 3 attack in, and you're also just afraid of dying on the following turn with a Zombeast. Something like a charge in combination with the Hydra that we see here could be very scary indeed for A8.
Yeah, as a general rule, you don't want to be taking Raptor Hatchlings with this deck off your Builder Beasts. Lifesteal Rush, deal 2 damage to everything. That's
a lot of healing.
Dream. Oh, the absolute dream from BloodTrail. That is insane. Forget Build a Beast. BloodTrail just built a Reno.
And how does A8 deal with this outside of an Alexstrasza off the top? Well, I mean, I guess that's actually it. Alexstrasza off the top. That's pretty much it.
No follow-up required.
And this is the power that we see from Builder Beast now, with so many new lifesteal cards added in the form of like Swamp Leech, the Vicious Scale Hide as well. You're so likely to be able to find some kind of healing, as has come up massively here for BloodTrail.
Not actually 100% obvious,
yeah.
is it? 11 is a small number. A Lich King card plus any recruit that gets a Devil Saw here can kill you.
So you are setting up lethal with this play because you go up to 19 damage with all the Mind Blasts and Hero Powers, and you have 3 damage on the board. So I can totally see the reasoning for this play. But if you are relying on an Alexstrasza, the extra Mind Blast doesn't actually make any difference.
Okay, I mean, it's interesting because he does take 3 after the fact, I believe. Yes, so
but it heals him up.
Oh, it heals him up again. Right. I forget about that interaction. It's a little bit counterintuitive until you really sit down and explain why that happens. But
so there's
yeah,
no
he does
downside
end up back
to this
at 30
now. Right. And it's coming into play again. These lifesteals are so absurdly good for BloodTrail. And his line of thinking now of going for the much more defensive play, it could very possibly have not gone his way if he hadn't found the absurdly good lifesteals. In fact, I would actually say it was unlikely to go anywhere near this well for him in terms of the lifesteal options available.
Just passed over. Does he have lifesteal on that Flappy Bird as well? I feel like he does. I think I just caught the L on there as well.
I think A8 might also be catching the L here.
I'm glad you caught that. That was a test, and you passed.
It's me.
The shadows grow short.
Realizing he just has to kill this off, because even with an Alexstrasza off the top, he just dies.
Set, take 3. Nope, just kidding. Back at 30.
That's just it.
This deck's stupid.
As BloodTrail manages to equalize, we're going to our second Game 5 of the day, and we are only 2 series in. A pretty absurd game of Hearthstone there, as, you know, Deathstalker Rexar often delivers one of the coolest cards, one of the most skill-testing cards, I would argue, available in Hearthstone at the moment. And BloodTrail, with his defensive life gain style of play, beautifully gets himself through to 2 games apiece.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I think Deathstalker Rexar was underwhelming up until, as you mentioned, all of these additional lifesteal minions got added into the game. And we heard from A8 saying that he did not feel like Recruit Hunter was a great deck to bring to Conquest. Perhaps he wasn't able to factor in an opponent that can roll lifesteal every single turn off his Deathstalker Rexar, because that was a little bit absurd, Derek.
It was indeed, but I think it had to realize going into that he was probably fairly unfavored, because it's not like his opponent in BloodTrail got the perfect Hunter draw. He didn't go seeping oozling into double play dead and just close out the game in the primary win condition. He won pretty much single-handedly through Deathstalker Rexar. So
yeah, I mean, I do wonder, because A8's draw was very slow as well. His Alexstrasza was buried. We didn't see it the whole game.
Yeah.
So if you consider it potentially like a race between drawing DK Rexar and drawing Alexstrasza, and then as long as you're able to deal with a couple of board states as the Priest, maybe you're entitled to just pressure them back, because they don't have any natural healing in their deck, right? Which is always something the Priest is on the lookout for. But yeah, I mean, in essence, the reason you bring Recruit Hunter to a tournament like this is to beat up on slow control and combo decks. So just doing its job for BloodTrail so far, and maybe it is a good Conquest deck after all.
Absolutely. I mean, it kind of feels to me like it's going for Shudderwock 2 in your lineup, where it's a little bit weaker to the aggro decks, just dominates the control decks, but Recruit Hunter is even weaker to the aggro decks. We know Shudderwock Shaman to be. But once again, it has to try and take a victory with his Control Priest. Was looking not that bad in the last series, came very close to being able to take a victory on a couple of occasions. But here for BloodTrail, he's got a very nice hand moving along.
This is a matchup. I talked about the opportunity to outlast the damage, which didn't quite happen with the Hunter memes, despite all the lifesteal that was available, but he still had plenty of lifesteal to spare. But this is a matchup as the Taunt Druid, Derek, where some people do try and actually play quite defensively. They hold on to a lot of armor gain in the late game. Others will just play out cards and try and beat them up. Like, where do you come down on the debate?
I mean, very often when I'm playing this matchup and you get Psychic Screamed as the main reason to not just go for a full aggro game plan, Hadronauts as quick as you can, and kill them with branching paths for damage. I think if you play your cards in a very conservative style of play, where you're holding on to Dragon Hatchers to pull dragons back out of the deck once they're shuffled in, maybe holding on to Oakheart unless it's purely perfect right when you play it. But at the same time, when you get Wild Growth, Nourish, Golem into Lich King on curve, I think you play fairly aggressive.
I have no counter to this point. It seems solid.
But that is what I like about this matchup, is that it is not super linear. Both decks have very different ways they can go about it. The Priest can try and dominate board in the early stages of the game with their Twilight Drakes, things like that, and even steal some of the very impactful minions like Lich King. They can hit something like Twilight Acolyte into the Cabal Shadow Priest, or they can just hope the armor gain is there from their opponent and just destroy them with Alex Straza and Andor.
A8 just going to leave the Lich King hanging around. Does neuter it in terms of attack, but it is going to be able to pick up another card on the following turn if it remains alive. Just chose to cycle with the Divine Hymn play with Pyromancer Cleric, and you see there immediately, Divine Hymn is such a better card in a variety of situations, such a clutch card for a combo deck to have. But the difference between it and Circle of Healing in situations like that as your Pyromancer combo activator is just night and day. You know, 2 cards instead of 4 in that spot alone.
It absolutely is why most of the players playing Priest are going for the combo variant that we see from Dog, and I believe Rugal as well, which could be very cool later on, as BloodTrail has to simply trade away his Lich King here, in his thinking at least, to fight back and protect his Primordial Drake, which is reasonable thinking, but this Drake is really not doing all too much.
Yeah, and you have to say that is an exchange that was emphatically won by A83650 because he could have panicked and killed that Lich King himself. He had like Coin Holy Fire, ridiculous things like that available to him to kill the 8/8s. He left it alive, and then BloodTrail just essentially discarded a card from his hand by trading it off into the 8/2.
And in terms of other things that have really not gone in BloodTrail's favor, the fact that he had both Ironwood Golem and Oaken Summons available to play on turn 4, went with the Ironwood Golem instead of the summons, I guess, to try and get himself maximum power up of his Spellstones at a later point.
Well, it's also because in this matchup, you only want to really start gaining armor once you've stabilized the board, because you don't want your armor to get hit by minions. You want to throw all your armor on top after you've been Alex Straza.
I think, however, that's very possibly too late game thinking. Like, are you going to end up in a scenario where you have locked down board if you haven't played the Oaken Summons? Because that helps you to lock down the board in a pretty major way.
That's a great point. But he did play a 3/6 regardless, right? That was the debate.
Yes, yeah, he ends up. But you can then put yourself in a position where you can draw patches, if you will, like getting the final Ironwood Golem.
Yeah, no. I mean, and that is exactly the debate that I brought up early on. You know, some people will say hold your armor, some people will say play your cards. It's just a very divergent path in this matchup as to whether you want to give yourself that late game insurance or whether you want to say I don't need late game insurance if I just take control of the game early on.
And so now this is a pretty interesting turning point for A8, where obviously, at some point in the near future, he has the possibility for Psychic Scream, which obviously he doesn't want to go for on such a meager board as this one. But if he does go for his powerful minions before he goes for the Psychic Scream, I wonder if it will ever get through to the position where he actually wins board. Like with this hand, is it a hand that you can hope to beat the likes of Master Oak, Dragon Hatcher, or something like that, and actually get some damage through to face? Because here, he is starting to contest the board, but I wonder if this is enough to actually fight back against all these taunts.
Is a spicy meatball. Yeah, it was different. To your point, it was different with the older variation of the deck that was a little more minion heavy. They had like Scale Worms and things thrown in as well, where classically they would be slightly ahead on the board against Druid going through kind of turn 4, 5, 6. Less so now, because as you mentioned in I think the previous game when we were breaking down what A8 had left in terms of minions, the answer was not a lot. So it's actually going to be quite difficult for him to take control of the board at any point here.
So now, interestingly for BloodTrail, even though he does manage to rip the Hadronox right off of the top, it doesn't actually do all that much. What taunts have actually died so far this game? It's just an Ironwood Golem, I think.
One Ironwood
Golem? That's actually died so far because everything else was simply screamed back into the deck.
And he's Lich King, right? As well.
Right, of course, yeah.
So, I mean,
that's
good enough,
then.
right?
Yeah.
That kind of changes everything.
That all of a sudden becomes very nice indeed, because then, as we mentioned, if you have 2 Lich Kings die on the next one, later on in the game, you could very possibly be ending up with 2 or 3 Lich Kings.
BloodTrail's hitting face here. It's looking like he's setting up a Doom Pack play. I talked about this in the Taunt Druid Mirror, where it can be very, very powerful. But just dealing with the 8/8 here is good enough, and getting an 8/8 of his very own. And now you see Daruk, who's being results-oriented now. That's 6 armor going on top.
And he gets the Golem as well. It ends up pretty beautifully here for BloodTrail. And I guess that's something I didn't really consider, even though we saw it in the last series with Psychic Scream and Recruit. Very interesting interactions.
You are provably wrong based on this one-game sample of interactions between Alexstrasza and Oaken Summons. You don't have to take my crap, Daruk. You're not Raven. You can fight back. I know you have it in you.
No, I'm far too English. I'm just going to bottle it up, push it down to my toes, and pretend I like you.
Okay.
I mean, continue to enjoy your sterling company.
Well played.
I wonder.
And now for A8, still in that same situation, where he is face down with a board that's threatening, but not too scary compared to what he will inevitably be seeing very soon. He just feels like he has to go for the Psychic Scream and pray that his opponent does not have the refill, which I think is a fine line of thinking, because if your opponent at this point does have the absolute nuts of something like Witching Hour into cube and then Witching Hour into another cube, you're just going to die because it's too much pressure for you to be facing down. So you need to pray they do not have the ability to repopulate the board, and then you start to dominate with your own dragons.
Right.
Let's see.
Both Witching Hours available now for BloodTrail.
And we could even just see Witching Hour obliterate on this turn.
Yeah, does he want to take 7 though? That's the question, right?
Probably not.
He could just like upgrade his Spellstone twice, Spellstone it so it's at 1 health, and then obliterate it. That's the real man's play right there.
I think while some form of killing it off on this turn was very much worth considering, he's still just all in on the draw of cube. Like, even though it's been silenced here, it's not that bad, because one board, now that both Psychic Screams have been dealt with, will be perfectly good enough.
Yeah, one board lives forever as long as it's of reasonable sized minions, and those reasonable sized minions are all BloodTrail has, because again, as time has gone on with Taunt Druid, the small taunts, the Tar Creepers, and even earlier than that, the Rotten Apple Bounds have gone away, and it is just high health taunt minions left remaining.
And that's going to be a board which still is not too threatening because of the crazy amount of shuffling we've seen from Psychic Screams. But at some point, unless another silence or shuffle effect comes in, which I don't think there are any left in the deck, it would have to be a steal on this cube if he can find the Twilight Acolyte off the top, which would actually be
really strong.
Pretty devastating, yeah. So maybe that is the play here for A8, because if he sees a big board from his opponent, he will never be able to resist against that anyway. So he goes for the Shadow Reaper Anduin on this turn, and just pray that he finds that copy of Twilight Acolyte to steal the cube.
Yes. The downside then is that BloodTrail can play around that. He can break open his cube himself, which you know, I imagine he will have the recognition to do so.
I would agree with you. Like, he has, this is the situation where he's so far ahead, he just needs to think, how do I possibly lose? Against the Alexstrasza, or he's already seen Alexstrasza, I suppose, but against the Mind Class damage to faceplay, he has branching paths. And there, even with another cube.
Yeah, you see it straight away. BloodTrail knows what's up. He recognizes that this cube has to be broken out with right now. It's much easier to see when you draw a cube that also lets you kill another Hadronox immediately this turn. But it looked like he was very much in business. And now, how shallow his original pull was is starting to work in his favor, because he has got Lich Kings pretty much all the way down from this point.
Oh,
there's an AMS. Yeah. And this is looking very over, Daruk.
I'm not really seeing any way that A8 can get past this. 2 Psychic Screams. Oh, the first one came from the Shadow Visions.
Oh, that's huge. That is everything.
That's crazy huge.
Daruk is out of his seat right now, just craning over the monitor in disbelief. And now the Army of the Dead response gets him a Hadronox right back.
but there is still now a Psychic Scream left in the deck. So that it has to be that from A8.
That looked like a Duskbreaker to me. It is indeed. Well, this was a roller coaster. A roller coaster mostly caused by us not noticing that the Psychic Scream was taken off of Shadow Visions earlier, but it certainly made those 2 turns a lot more interesting than they seemed initially.
And once again, we're in that situation where A8 just doesn't really have any way to fight back against this. Too many Lich King cards available to BloodTrail.
A8's just deciding to go pure aggression.
We can see that's just not going to get in there. It looks like BloodTrail with a real nail-biter of an end there, due to the branching paths able to just deliver lethal, I believe, on this turn. Can close out the game, advancing through to being 1 game away from advancing through to the group stages tomorrow.
Yeah, you see, A8 recognizes what's up. He is already checked out. BloodTrail goes through the formalities of the damage. Again, another crazy series. It's pretty much just what the tournament meta looks like right now. Very greedy decks, hugely explosive combo decks, all butting heads with each other and trying to find a winner. But we are still yet to see that spanner thrown in the works, which is the aggro decks coming into play later on in the day.
That's exactly right. And congratulations to BloodTrail. But for A8 there, his signature twist on his lineup in the Control Priest coming up pretty terribly for him there. Just not able to find the matchups he was looking for because, as he stated himself, he pretty much needs to get those aggro matchups if he's going to be taking a win with it.
He does, but as you mentioned, BloodTrail sitting pretty in the winners, and I believe we have Cora standing by so we can get a word with our Victor.
That's right, I'm joined by BloodTrail here, the winner of our 2nd series of the day, taking it over A83650. First off, congratulations. Very, very well played there. How are you feeling right now, knowing that you've gotten the first win that you needed in this tournament?
首先恭喜你拿到首次的胜利，然后你现在感觉如何呢？
感觉很开心啊，因为本来1比2落后，本来以为再输一场就要回家，星期六才打。
I feel really good because I was 1-2, which is losing the match, but right now I got over this.
Yeah, it's always difficult to come back from a deficit in games there and actually end up taking it there in game number 5. So a very impressive performance here from BloodTrail. Of course, I have to ask, that game number 4, the Hunter versus the Priest, was one of the craziest games that I've seen in a very long time. A managed to put you down to such low life totals time and time again, and you kept your cool, and you just went and built the beasts that you needed to win that game. What was going through your head during the later stages of game number 4, the Hunter versus the Priest?
你第4场的时候是用猎人打牧师，然后他牧师一直就把你的血量都压得很低。你那时候是想什么呢？
就想血不要低于他的斩杀线19滴吧，就要维持在19滴以上，因为他暗影灵是有可能找到3个星宝。
He's saying that he's keep thinking just keep the health around 19th to prevent you lose the matches.
Well, very well prepared for that matchup. Mind Blast Priest is not a super common deck in this tournament format, so to know that matchup in and out, very, very impressive indeed. Congratulations again, BloodTrail. He is moving on to the winner's match of his group, and he will be playing against the winner of Nalgidon versus Yuyi. But I believe up next, we're going back to Group A, which is going to be Tansoku taking on Zhao T. So let's throw it back over to Sottle and Derek on the desk.
Yeah, easy. You just keep building beasts so you stay above 19 health. It's easy.
Yeah,